Lights on. Wow, that's loud. Okay. Let's see. All right. Let's see. I believe I played with the system a little bit today to see if it would work a little better. Maybe we won't have the feedback we had, or not feedback, but the hum. We'll see if it fixes that. The only reason really we have the table is because we do have several people who are online with us, and it's a whole lot easier for them to hear and be a part of conversation if you're at the table. So I'm not saying that you're bad for sitting back here. Just that, what's that? Well, yeah, but you're sitting right by him, and he's the people. But it may take me a little longer to get back here with the microphone, and I definitely won't be able to hear you as well. Because it's surprising how difficult it is sometimes to hear whenever you're listening to somebody who's mic'd up and then somebody comments who's not. Okay, a couple of things. This goes somewhere. Where does it go? Okay, fantastic, yes. All right, testing. Okay, that works. The fact that I'm also mic'd up means saying testing into a microphone.
Not really going to make a difference.
Doesn't really help. All right.
That's okay.
All right, say something, David.
Something, David.
All right, I think that worked okay. Say it again.
Again. It again. Sorry.
It's not super loud.
Yeah, I'm not that funny either.
Yeah, but the blue one should work a little better. Okay, so the difference I think for tonight is that if you're online with us, you don't necessarily have your own questions, because I wanted it to be a little more open-ended, I guess. As you can tell from looking at your paper, and probably as you could tell from watching the episode. What were some things you guys noticed in the episode that was different than some of the previous ones we've watched? No, there wasn't any conflict, there wasn't any fighting or problems in every other episode. Even the good people have had, real conflicts even within themselves. Yes, exactly. This one was a self-contained unit. If you had not watched any of the previous information, you could watch this one and it'd be fine. It was its own sort of contained lesson. There weren't a lot of characters. We didn't see Peter and Matthew and, Lilith and the usual cast of people. The only person I saw that had been in any previous episodes was Jesus, and he hasn't really been a big player so far. That also means, though, to go back to something you've talked about a couple of times that I totally agree with, how much of this episode was biblically grounded? Yeah. Zoe's back there going, no, nothing. There's nothing in this that you can look at Scripture and back up. Yes, there are instances where the disciples, and that's pretty typical. I mean, those are verses they would have known. One thing I thought was fascinating that we don't see backed up in Scripture, and has nothing to do with our lesson tonight, but I thought it was fascinating, so I want to tell you. Did you notice how Jesus did the singing? Did you notice the way that happened? Yeah, so he would sing a verse and then they would repeat it. From what I've understood, that's the way that first century Christians would have done singing. They didn't have songbooks, so they wouldn't have had the song. They'd say, turn to song number 476, and they would have sung the Psalms, for example. So, I guess theoretically they could have said, turn to Psalm 42, but, yeah. First of all, they didn't all have a scroll. second of all, even if they did have a scroll, a lot of them weren't literate to that degree. Like, what's that? Yes, exactly. Like Abigail was special because she could read. The boys theoretically should have been able to read some, but even in, Jewish society, this wasn't a requirement. And we all know there's a big difference between being literate and being able to sing a song that you're reading, besides like reading music. So in the first century church, that's pretty much the way they would have done singing is, if I were the song leader, I would have sung the first verse and then you would have repeated it, and I would have sung the second, you would have repeated, and it would have gone kind of back and forth. And that's kind of an interesting dynamic that we don't see very often. I can only think of one time in my entire life I've ever heard a church do a round, for example, because those are weird to do in a congregation. You've got and it's in here, it's even weird because you got one lane, so you can do like 2, or you can do like 4. But it's like, okay, this side start, and then it's like gymnastics in church, which we don't approve of. Okay, so I thought that was interesting. I wanted to point that out more as a way for us to understand that there are tiny details that they either get right or wrong that changes the feel of a certain moment for better or worse, but, some things are doing a lot of work in to make it historical, but then other, like this entire episode was like ahistorical. Some of the other episodes we can see where they're drawing some of those background information pieces from. Okay, so essentially the way that I divided up our handout is we do have some of the people like we normally do. I have some questions on Jesus, on Abigail, on Joshua, on some of the other children, or some of the other things I noticed. But I had a section at the beginning, and let me know what you think, because this may be something we kind of put in generically for us to sort of guide some thoughts with it. But in the episode as a whole, what was something in the episode that was surprised you? Something that was said or done, or something you noticed that surprised you? Say that again? Yes, yeah, exactly. You got this moment where Jesus is like making silly noises, and I think they planned that moment, because not that Jesus was serious until then, but that was the moment where you're kind of like, okay, Jesus is different maybe than other adults might be, or is that the kind of thing you'd expect Jesus to do? No.
I don't suppose what they wrote about it, so.
I do, because there were times in the Bible that he had a sense of humor, and it was a quirky sense of humor,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to really study the time and place and.
There it goes. It died on us. Yeah, it just died. Oh well. Well, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you bring up a good point, Rob, that when you have a person who, by definition, is a human, he's been on Earth for 30 years, most people have a sense of humor, right? Like I've met very few people who aren't funny under certain circumstances. Yes?
What we see, I don't expect the early scripture writers to have written he said this joke and it's really funny, right? We have different things for our media and our books and so on. But he was clearly magnetic. He had people captivated all the time. We don't know what he did, or he made money with his mouth or whatever, but he always had a crowd of people, kids, around him or whatever. So I think that tells us that whatever it was, he was still he drew people to him.
And you bring up a really good point, and this is something that that I'm talking about in a couple of weeks at camp, is that the gospel writers, and it's something we all know, we all know this, the gospel writers weren't writing history. They weren't sitting down like, okay, it's time to tell the story of Jesus, let's put the facts down. It's factual, but they were telling a story. They wanted us to go somewhere with them. Any good storyteller they're going to leave out pieces that have nothing to do with anything. Don't we love those people that tell us a story, and they'll put in every random detail until 6 hours later they're trying to sum up this story because they put in all of these pieces. The gospel writers can't do that, right? And so to your point, like, who knows what kind of, things he did behind the scenes, but it wasn't Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John's purpose. Like, that wasn't that was not part of their goal. And so, yeah, that would surprise us, but it is interesting to think about, Jesus had jokes, he had lighthearted moments, he said things to be facetious, he said things to turn the tables on what was going on or what was expected. In fact, that's the point we made with the teens a lot, is basically nothing Jesus ever says you can take directly at face value, because his purpose is to leave you with something different, to subvert expectations a little bit. And then Debbie, she mentions that when Jesus was teaching the children at the end, he made the comment that the children were more ready to believe him than others, that were older. It was like a prelude to teaching the apostles as children, but not as accepting as the little ones with him. He was going to teach them, but they weren't just going to accept what he said. And like that never turns out poorly for the apostles, does it? That they hear what he says, and then they translate it to something weird, and then it comes out the other end, and to your point, Jesus is basically like, wait, what? That's not what I said. I don't know where you got that from. And so I am interested, Debbie, you mentioned that. I am really interested in this idea of like how is he going to tie, how are the writers of the show going to tie these threads up later? What kind of things are we going to see later on? Yes, you're the designated talker, I guess. Yes. Oh, hold on one second. There you go. There you go.
I like how they depicted how Jesus meets every individual from where they are and what level they're at, and leaves them with open-ended questions, kind of like to get them thinking. And this little boy wanted to solve his problem by punching out his friend.
Yeah.
And he said, gave him a different way of dealing, a godly way of dealing with that particular situation. And, and I don't know, it was rich, I thought.
Going to what you're saying, one of the things that I liked about this episode again, I think I'm wondering how they're going to play this out later. And I see this a lot in some of the best teachers I know do this. There was no he didn't treat them like they didn't know anything, but there was never an assumption that they were anything more than children. You're kids, and I'm going to teach you the things where you are and in the place you are. You don't need to make an excuse for not knowing everything. You don't know things. That's perfectly fine that you don't know things. Here's where you are. Let's take you to the next step. That kind of thing. And that's in the best teachers that I know, they're able to do that. Take whatever the topic is, and I'm not going to treat you like you don't know what you're talking about, or, oh, that's too complicated for you. That kind of thing.
I like the way he brought in them reciting, like
the Shema. Yeah,
Shema,
exactly.
and then that reference to Isaiah about him, why he came. And also, did he try to teach him in the King James version of the Lord's Prayer? I thought that was kind of cute.
I did notice, too, that when they did the Shema, they did it a little differently than we do. And I didn't do the research into that. But I was kind of wondering, as they recited the Shema, if theirs was a little different, or if they went with the Septuagint, or like what the... I don't know. But I thought that was interesting.
It doesn't really matter.
No, it doesn't at all. Though they would have probably used the Septuagint, because it was interesting, because nobody knew Hebrew, even though they spoke Aramaic, which is related. So you guys have the questions there, the 7 or 8 questions about the episode. I don't necessarily want to go through these individually, but take a second and read through them and see, are there things on there that pique your interest that you would like to talk about the episode sort of as a whole?
I like this. What application can we take away? The grace element.
Yeah, the grace of the episode.
The grace, how what application can we take away and apply to life today? You know, that element of grace that God shows us, the grace of not condemning us for our lack of head knowledge or how we apply it, but he's patient and extends such grace, and we should do the same to others.
So I'm going to take your idea for a second, and I'm going to kind of like do things with it, but I want you to tell me that this is what you're thinking as we're going through this.
Okay.
When I hear you talk about grace, my first thought was that grace was what we saw him give to Mary Magdalene, or grace is what we're later going to see him give to Matthew, that grace is looking at this terrible person and forgiving them. But what you're saying is that the grace you liked in this episode is him looking at these children and not blaming them for being children, not blaming them for not understanding, not yelling at them for doing things that kids do. Just, they are who they are, and, you know, God is going to love them exactly where they are, and that is grace. And I love that. I didn't think of that specifically, but I love that because I think that makes a lot of sense for the church. Because a lot of times in church, I don't mean this to sound bad, but a lot of times we don't know people's failings. Right? Like, I don't know what you guys struggle with, what your temptations are. I don't know what things that you've repented of in the last day that you feel terrible about. I mean, we all kind of make fun of this idea, don't we, that like a family comes in and they park the car and they've been fighting the whole way, and like breakfast wasn't ready and the shoes are on the wrong feet and they're yelling at each other. And you park the car, and then mom or dad, whoever, is like, okay, guys, be quiet. We got to go into church.
Yes.
You know, everybody straighten up, and they, you know, and they walk in and nobody knows. Like, that's the grace we're used to. But the other side is exactly what you're saying. That family's coming in as they are. And our job is to extend grace to them to say it's okay that the morning didn't go well. It's okay that, you know, breakfast wasn't quite right, and everything went sideways. We accept you as you are, and we love you as you are, and, you know, who you are is good enough. And that's what we see coming through in Christ here. That's the extension of grace, too. And then Debbie's going on the same point with the application. She says, the application I saw was to approach learning about God with the mindset of a child, to be inquisitive and open to him. Yes, did you? I'll throw you the blue one, because I think this one actually works now. I don't know.
Until it decides not to.
Yes, it works until it doesn't work. It's like me.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the things that sets the children apart from adults is they were unafraid to ask the questions. It wasn't like, is this rude, or, you know, what's going on? They were asking all kinds of very intensely personal questions and very, like, direct. And like there wasn't a wrong question or whatever, and he welcomed that. And you know, you were talking about, like, he talked at different levels to people. Adults talk over kids' head all the time. Like, you'll remember this later. You know, I said this or whatever. But I think it's just interesting that the kids are, like, uninhibited. They're going to ask whatever questions. And
Yeah,
Too
and
far.
He did say something at one point along that line, like, you know, you're not ready to understand this yet, or he said something like that. But yeah, the vast majority of things that they asked, he was just perfectly upfront with. It was, is your father rich? And it's like, yeah, maybe that's a question we'll have to unpack, like, later, like. Yes, exactly. Yes, I'm in construction, and my dad does Streets of Gold. Like, that's the. Yes, exactly.
There's no no to this, but there's not exactly yes.
Yeah, and I know the next question is, well, who's your dad? And that's going to get awkward, like, you know. Yeah. I got that impression, too, that there were a couple of times where he's kind of like, you know, what was that, Zoe? Yeah, I wondered that. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, is there? Okay, so they did ask his name in the book, but they didn't in the episode, which I guess, you know, they only have. I don't know. I apologize. These are weird episodes. I'm used to. Oh, so you're cheating, in other words. Yes. I didn't know there was a book. But yeah, I noticed that this episode. Yeah. This episode was right at 22 minutes in like, it wasn't very long. But then the other episode was like 50 minutes or something. So that's going to be kind of a weird give and take as we go through this. Was the
I like that he thanked Abigail for making a right choice. It was hard for her to make.
I did notice that. I loved that part. And of course, when what was it? Not taking his food. Don't thank you for not taking my food.
It says
Yes.
I don't know if it said here, but she was hungry.
Yeah, she said it in the episode that she was
I
hungry
was
and
hungry, but I didn't
didn't take
so
it, and
it'd
he-
be right.
And he noticed, he appreciated, he thanked her.
yes, and I thought I one day I'm going to write TV shows apparently because as I'm watching I'm thinking about like how they would have built it and what they're trying to say behind these different things, and with that it's more he's trying to tell her I knew what was happening even though I wasn't here. Like that was the point. But you're exactly right. Like he's yeah.
Always easy, but you made a right choice and you thanked her.
And we see that today. Like one of the things I've noticed scripturally is that we see Jesus doing a lot of things that in modern times, modern psychologists or historians or sociologists or whatever will say, this. Recently, I was reading a leadership book. Recently, meaning 10 years ago, I was reading a leadership book, and they were talking about this kind of leadership that they thought people should really start doing in their businesses, which we would call servant leadership. It's like, well, Jesus has been doing this for a couple of years. This isn't new. Like, this isn't a new thing. This is a very old thing that we are just now picking on that works. And so, to your point, we see this with a lot of people now as they're saying that, Lee has a degree in psychology. And so her psychology teacher loved saying that the more that he hated studying rats because they weren't anything like humans, but that the more he studied rats, the more they were like humans. At the beginning, he thought this is dumb; they're nothing like us. And the more he studied rats, he's like, yes, they're just like us. We are animals, and you can study our behavior. And if you're going to train a dog, positive reinforcement works. Giving them treats when they do well works like that. And we don't do well, humans don't do well with negative reinforcement. We don't do well when you yell at us for doing the wrong thing. And yet we see in the episode Jesus doing the opposite. And of course we realize that this story isn't based in reality. And yet you can also look at what Jesus did in his life, and like the only people he yelled at were the Pharisees. The only time he ever yelled at somebody that I can ever find is the person who was being critical of someone else. Yeah, like yes, he didn't yell at them; he just beat them with whips. But yeah, the only people we can see like Jesus being negative toward are those people who are standing in the way of somebody else and God. Other than that,
Or they're standing in the wrong way.
I'm trying to think of an example.
The guy who's standing on the street corner thanking God that he's not like these other people.
That's actually, I love that story where Jesus is, for everybody online, the man who's standing at the street corner, I'm trying to think what it was. Was it a temple? Thank you that I'm not like these other people. Thank you I'm not like this tax collector. I do all these wonderful things, and
I tithe my
yes, exactly.
my mint and
And Adam actually online mentions the same thing that you mentioned to a degree, which is that children don't have a filter. They're just going to ask the question. And I think sometimes we get in our own way with that issue too, in that we especially, I hate to say this sounds terrible, especially at church. We don't have a filter as adults a lot of times. We have walls. Filters lets things out. Where walls, you have to like open the gate and let the idea out and then close the gate. And I think sometimes at church, we build them a doubly thick. And what we see with Jesus, what we see with children, and what we see in those relationships we're supposed to have, is that vulnerability and intimacy can't happen when you have these really thick walls where you don't let yourself out, where you don't give up people opportunities to see you in unfiltered moments. And that's something I see very seldom in church, is sort sort of those unfiltered moments. And part of that is we don't really get a chance to sit around a table like this very often.
I found Debbie, I found the ladies' class really was rich because we got to know, each as what our challenges are. So that's, little groups, you really get to know
Yeah,
people.
yeah. They don't let me go to the ladies' class.
Well,
For the people online,
it's not because
yeah.
I'm not inviting you.
No, but okay. Yeah, she was saying that.
Point is that,
Yeah, you have that intimacy,
richness
and
comes when you get into small groups,
mm,
one-on-one. Because on some days you just can't have that intense conversation with people.
yeah, exactly. We don't have any platform upon which to build intimate moments, really, and so
It does, there are times when
you know,
I can recall talking with one-on-one with people.
yeah, after services are over or before services, and you sit down and you can have a really good conversation. Yeah. Let's see. I did find it interesting, and Len mentions this as well. I didn't do the research into this. I appreciate you turning the fans on. I was thinking the same thing, but I was apparently just going to melt up here anyway. Yeah, yeah. Well, the problem is the closer to this table you get, the more hot air you get. Like that's the. Yeah. But I don't actually know. I have no idea. I have no base of knowledge for this. But Jesus. So the way the fans. I found this to be very counterintuitive. The way the fans work is you turn them off, and then you turn them on just like a 1/64th of an inch. And then the further you go, the lower they get. So you have to like turn it all the way back to the beginning to put them on high. I don't understand. Yeah, I guess it's like an old school telephone. Yeah. Yes, exactly. I found it to be very confusing. Yeah, the old rotary phones. It's kind of like those. But I don't have any knowledge of this at all. But Jesus spent a lot of time building a lock, and I like understood the way that he was building a lock. I just don't know if that's like a historically accurate thing. I always did kind of wonder, if Jesus could do things that weren't historically appropriate. Like when they asked him what his favorite food was, if he was going to be like pizza.
Yeah.
But it doesn't exist yet,
I have understood, and I don't know how true it is, but from other Bible classes, that the carpentry wasn't necessarily wood in those days. He may have been working, he more than likely was working rocks
Mhm.
and concrete type things other than.
yes, you're exactly right. The word, yes, exactly. Yeah.
When translating the text, what would make sense to English, like for the people at the time, yes, a stone, like a stone mason is a highly paid and trained job, highly sought after, very professional, very
Yeah, one day,
but there's no wood out in the desert, there's olive trees, that's not really wood and bacon, that's just driving mines.
so one day we're going to do a class, and I'm going to love teaching this class, and no one's going to come because it's going to be as boring as it can possibly be, but I'm going to have so much fun teaching it, where we're going to talk about translations and going into the biblical text and how do we take the biblical text into something we understand today. And what you're pointing out is exactly true, because, and in fact, Aiden and I have,
He had to work on Herod's palace in some case, somebody said.
yes, there was a town being built when Jesus was a child that Jesus never mentions in the Gospels, or at least the Gospel writers never mention. And it was mainly a stone building because they didn't have giant trees to build stuff with. And so when you're in England and you're translating the King James Bible, one of the hardest things that translators have to do is to take a concept and bring it into our concept. And sometimes that misses. Sometimes you don't quite, it doesn't fit all of its pieces. And so you have to decide what's more important. What's the most important thing for people to understand? And when you're looking at this idea of what Jesus did for a living, Jesus worked with stone. But working with stone in England was like a highly prized, paid position. But Jesus was not rich. Jesus was poor. He was as poor could be. And so you can't call him a stonemason. So what do you call him? Well, the word itself just means a creator, essentially. Either a builder, craft. The word just the word is tecton. It just means like a builder. So you've got the tectonic plates, and those are the things that everything is built on. But a tecton could be like a painter too. Anybody that creates a thing could be called a tecton. Yeah, like a maker. They have the idea of a maker. You go to a maker lab and you make a thing. Well, if you sew, you're a maker. If you're a bricklayer, you're a maker. If you do embroidery, you're a maker. But if you make phones, you're a maker. And so that same thing kind of carries over. Yes. Yeah. How do you want Jesus to be viewed? Do you want him to be viewed as a rich person, or all these different things? And so the translators had to make hard decisions, and they chose to make a decision that completely misses the point in some ways and completely gets it in others. Because when you look at the epistles, for example, and even some of the Gospels, there are a bunch of stoneworking metaphors, tons of stoneworking metaphors, which is perfect if Jesus works with stone. There aren't any woodworking metaphors. There's no metaphor where Jesus is whittling away a piece of wood and turns it into something wonderful, which is a great metaphor for the apostles to use.
Say measure twice, cut once.
Yeah, exactly. If Jesus had ever said measure twice, cut once, people, what's wrong with you? Then we'd have known, like, okay, he works in 2x4s. But we have tons of these, stonemason metaphors. And to a degree, we saw that even in this episode, that they have him making like little things, which is exactly what a carpenter would have done. But you wouldn't have seen a carpenter making, framing for a house. That wasn't the way they used wood. So that was a slightly off the subject, just a wee bit. And yeah, I agree. Len makes the point too that this lesson with the children seems to be a setup for the Matthew and Luke 18 passages, where we have these same kinds of things talked about, and some of the missed opportunities there, so to speak.
I'd like to say I liked the way they portrayed him as not treating the children as a group. He treated them as individual people in a group.
I loved that. I didn't notice that at all until you said it. But yeah, he didn't treat them as a group. He treated them as individuals with individual concerns and questions and
I see Jesus treating the people he encountered that way.
That's
in the Bible.
Yeah, and I guess I have never thought about it in quite that way, but that's something I've thought of recently that we have been doing a better job of as a society, but that over the course of history and at least in my opinion, the further back you go, the more people treat others as a group. I'm thinking of like World War II, where you had all the propaganda about the Germans being not robots. They didn't use that idea, but not barely human. And the Japanese were like, they would picture them like as was it like monkeys or something. And these, what we would be horrified by today, like you can't dehumanize people like that. But again, the further we go in history, the more we see people as individuals with their own, even if they're other. And of course, if you're Jesus, I don't know that you could be more other than human. All humans are other to Jesus. And yet, just because he's God, so there's a bigger difference between God and us. Yeah.
God doesn't think like we think.
Yeah, like if you were to make a graph with like, here's God, and here's like the smartest human, and here's the, like the difference between any two of us and God is, yeah.
This is something we're going to get into in the Bible class on Sunday morning, though.
I'm not repeating that because I don't want to give everybody a hint of what's going to be talked about in Bible class.
I don't. But we're going to be talking about Jesus coming as a person and how he could do that.
And the thing, going back to something you said a minute ago, I don't understand that.
It's
I haven't the froggiest idea how that happens. I know some things that are facts. I know that Jesus came as a person. I know that he was 100% person. That he had to mature and he grew and he all of the things. Luke 151. But how can you mature if you're God? How can you learn if you're God? And so I just have more questions than I have answers there. I understand a lot, but the more I understand, the less I understand. And I guess that's true with God.
What is the actual ratio? What is the mixing?
The answer is yes, seemingly. The answer seems to be yes, and that makes no sense. We can stay and we can talk as long as you guys want to. I'm gonna close up shop so that we can other people can do other things. But obviously, if you're at home or if you're here, you have exactly. You have like 74 questions left to go that we're not talking about because next week we're going on to episode 4. So you've got bonus questions. And if you're watching online, I have a paper I can send you, and you can get all of the questions for the low price of an email that I can send you at any time you want. Great to have you guys here. Great to see you guys. And we will pick up with episode 4 next week. I have no idea how long episode 4 is, so we will see how long we'll watch next week.
It's hard to see it.
I was going to ask. I didn't want to ask while we were like in class, but I went back and edited a little bit to make the nighttime more like daytime, which I thought was a little confusing.
It
because
helps to
he was
see
building
it
a
on
fire
that
in the
screen.
daytime, essentially, but it was really night.
Yeah, but it helped you to see what he was doing on the
Exactly.
screen.
That was what I was hoping, is that after I lightened it up, you could actually see what was happening. Because before you just like saw one eyeball
Yeah.
floating around.